Hi everyone, welcome to the Ecosystem Innovation video series. Today we're going to be talking again to my friends from Odesma. In the last video that we did with Ed and Nick, we talked about change, winning hearts and minds, talking about that transformation agenda and their perspective on the areas that an organization should consider as part of that journey, the stakeholders that you need to engage with, how you engage with them, and the importance of that. But as we discussed at the tail end of that video, Odesma do a really have a really interesting way of looking at well, why that change in the first place and where that change should occur and how you assess that. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about the Odesma apps called Assessor and Aurora. And with me again are Ed Cross and Nick Ford to give us the overview. Hi, gents. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Yeah,
good morning. How are you?
Cool. I know it's getting colder outside, so the winter's beginning to bite. So let's warm it up a little bit. So let's talk about Assessor and Aurora. So why assess the procurement function and its people? Can you give us your perspective on that, please?
Yeah, I think, at heart, assessing any function is just by nature part of a continuous improvement action. Mm-hmm. But perhaps just talk about the sort of shaggy dog story first, is that often we go to see clients and they ask us sort of how much their procurement function should cost, what sort of level of delivery they should achieve. So really, that's sort of how long is a piece of string, really, because it depends on all sorts of factors within your own business in terms of what you're trying to do. Yeah. But so I try and steer the conversation back in a different direction, which is to say, you need to assess really and look at all of your procurement function in terms of how it compares to best in class. And people say, sort of like, well, I am already best in class, for example. Okay, right, okay. Often not, but I say, when we talk about this, we sort of position it that best in class procurement functions typically, according to the media and written articles and so forth, deliver sort of 10 to 15% advantage in profitability or revenue terms to their own organization. And the reason being is that if you deliver really effectively in procurement, and effectiveness is a measure of the sort of cost reduction outcomes that you achieve, the cost competitiveness the procurement function delivers to the business in all its forms, not just price reduction, but in terms of innovation, creation of new products, new services, etc. That effectiveness can deliver a real advantage to the organization.
Right.
And at the same time, if you think about procurement, you think in terms of efficiency as well. You think about, well, how much does it cost to deliver all of that activity to the organization? So it's a sort of multifaceted answer to a client saying, so, how good am I?
And that's complex,
how
right?
Good you are.
Yeah, I think to your earlier point, a lot of organizations may well think they are as leaders, right? They think they're doing something really well, but how do you make that simpler, right? What tools do you have to make that simpler? Because today, I think that relies on a lot of data being pulled in from different areas and then trying to find the right assessment for each one of those areas, right? So yeah, how do you pull that together, Ed?
So in consultancy, there's a way of thinking about looking at any change program. It could be IT, it could be HR, it could be whatever you'd like it to be in terms of business change. And that is to break down all of what goes on into what are known as the 7 levers of change. So the 7 levers of change really quickly are strategy, okay, which is set by the board and the exco, etc. There's customers, i.e. demand from the outside world. Mm-hmm. There's suppliers, obviously the impact they have on your business. And then there's sort of 4 internal levers, okay? There's process, speaks for itself. Technology that enables the process to be more efficient and better. There is people, your staff, and the capability of the organization. And then there's the organizational structure itself. And if you look at any business, if you look at those 7 levers and analyze how a business or an operation is working, you can get a really good view of what's going on in the operation. So that would be straight out of the consultant's handbook, if you like.
Yeah. Okay.
And then,
right.
Sorry, man.
No. So yeah. So I was just going to ask how the way that you guys have done that, because you've tried to turn that a little bit on its head.
Yeah. So I think what you have to do is then say, well, that's all very good. It's a sort of consultancy approach to analysing, an activity set or a business, but you really need to turn that into the language of the function that you're looking at. So if we're looking at procurement, you need to think of it contextually in terms of what procurement do. So if you're looking at people, for instance, you need to think about the capabilities needed for a great procurement person, a great procurement individual in that operation. If you're looking at technology, you're not going to look at an HR solution. You're thinking in terms of procurement, you're thinking in terms of e-sourcing, P2P, etc., risk mitigation, software solutions. So what you have to do is you have to think in terms of maturity. You have to say to yourself, well, what does the scale of sort of 1 to 5 look like in terms of 1 being weak, 5 being world class, and capturing some thoughts about what that looks like. So what is best in class in AP processing? What is best in class in organizational structure? And then you take a simple view and say to the customer, right, so what do you do in this regard? Because then that allows you to calibrate how sophisticated they are. And then the final bit, having done that, thinking back to the strategy of the organization and where the business wants to be, that those 2 levers, if you like, that strategy piece and then that piece around, how they're doing against best in class, allows you to calibrate what you need to do,
right?
What the direction of travel is for procurement.
Sure, and then that does absolutely make sense, and then I think, like I was saying earlier, I think trying to pull that together often takes people looking at things in those different areas that you've talked about, right? Whereas I think what you've done, and Nick wanted to get your view on, that's the whole point of Assessor, right? How you guys have put Assessor together to kind of bring that together in a more, I say, simple form. So it's taking something more complex, but putting it all together in one area.
Yeah, no, that's the actual, the real point of what we've tried to do here. I mean, in the older days, we used to, in a procurement department, we could either bring a third-party consultancy in to assess our organisation, right, or we used to build complex questionnaires to do it, which is very time-consuming. But what we've tried to create here is a tool whereby you can repeat the assessment process as frequently as possible. Most organisations probably do this twice a year, some do it 3 or 4 times a year. But so you've got a very repeatable process. So you can look for improvements or areas of attention that are needed. So that's one thing. We've tried to create a tool that you can really calibrate. So it takes some of the subjectivity out of assessing across those dimensions that Ed's talked about. And it's very cost effective. It's very repeatable because it's all done through a self-survey. Right. So what we've done with the tool, taking the sort of key levers of change for a procurement organisation. So we look at how on strategy is that procurement organisation within the business. How good are their processes? How good are their systems? What about the people? How effective are the people? Going back to the previous video. How are they managing suppliers, and how is their organisation fit for purpose? So you can send this survey out to stakeholders, to customers of the procurement service, to internally within the procurement teams. They can fill this in, but you could also take a 360 view and actually send it to your suppliers if you wanted to as well. So suppliers have got a view, and so when we've done that with customers in the past, there's some interesting responses come back, as you can imagine. So you can take a whole 360 assessment approach across the relevant levers of change and the drivers, and get a very quick calibrated score as to where you sit you know, on that assessment structure, as Ed said, whether it's, you know, level 1, which is a very immature part of the organisation or part of processes within the organisation, or if it's up to 5, world class. And then what we've also done, we've overlaid, you know, our input of working with customers. So there's a sort of industry average, and there's a best in class for a company within its sector as well. And if we're working with the customer to do this on their behalf, we can also put a rating in as well. So you get a very dynamic sort of view as to where you're performing against each of those dimensions.
And best in class can mean different things to different companies, right? I think
yeah.
You can be best in class in a particular area, and therefore you feel like you have a great function, but suppliers are a good one, right? Getting that response from suppliers, making sure that you get that outside in view, because often suppliers are not seen that way outside of the strategic suppliers. So that can be quite, I think to your earlier point, it can be quite interesting reading, I assume, and it gives you a lever for change that you perhaps didn't think about.
Yeah, and depending how strategic those suppliers are, if they're a real, you know, strategic supplier to your organisation where you're looking to do innovation and collaboration, you're very interested in how management, probably more so than process and P2P, you know, effectiveness.
Right.
Whereas if it's more of a tail end supplier, or if it's a supplier where there's a lot of volume but not necessarily strategic in products or services, you're probably interested in the scoring of them around how your processes are working for them. So it's a real way of trying to get, you know, it's a good basis for some really effective supplier relationship management discussions as well.
So, I mean, you've got a picture of what the output looks like. Do you want to just quickly talk us through that? And then maybe we segue into, well, what do you do with that information? What do you do as a result of the assessment?
So in terms of the way that we describe that output, in really simple terms, we put that into typically a spidergram, which gives you a view of, on the scale of 1 to 5, across all of the dimensions of change that I mentioned earlier, how you compare to best in class, and then also how you compare to your peer group, other organizations like yourself. And then, as Nick said, we can take those inputs and then break them down into different viewpoints. So if we were working with a client, for example, they might say to us, well, you give us a view of what you think of us, because we've scored ourselves, but people are not always completely objective, understandably.
Sure. We'll
give a view, and then that will allow you so with a spidergram, to describe where there are gaps.
Yeah.
Okay. But you don't just take it at that level. What you then is what are we about and what are we trying to achieve? So going back to that strategy piece before, right, and say, right, so where do our priorities lie? What do we want to do? Because it's not just a mechanistic process, albeit we've automated it and created a technology solution that allows this to be all self-inputted, etc., and by suppliers and ourselves, etc. You then take that output and critically examine it, say, do we think this is right? And then you think of it against the backdrop of where the business, where your customers internally, maybe your external customers, where are they going and what do they want to see you do?
Right.
And then really that leads to the next step. And I think there's a slide on this as well in the video, which really describes the types of things that you might do over a 1 to 3 to 5 year horizon. So for example, you might find that, for instance, the processing of purchase orders is poor, your AP performance is poor as a result of, you know, perhaps a lack of use of purchase orders, for example, in requisition.
Right, connecting the two worlds, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you might see from the analysis that is a real pinch point for the business. It might not be, you know, top 5 strategic initiative, but it's something that's really important that you get right in your environment. And then from this activity, thinking about cost, effort, and so forth, you then prioritize what you're going to do and come up with a route map that says, right, these are the changes that we want to make over a period of time to improve our operation, our business, but also to ultimately achieve some, you know, a step towards best in class. I would just caveat one thing though, Mo, just before we go on, and you're going to speak then, but not everybody needs to be best in class.
Right, exactly.
You know, because there's a trade-off between investment level and return. So it's nice to be best in class, but it doesn't necessarily deliver the super return that you want, because the more, to get to the very best, you have to invest more, and the cost becomes quite prohibitive. So a balancing act, and I think that's where, you know, the human interaction comes into the process.
But that's what I was going to actually ask, is that linking the areas of change to the business strategy doesn't mean that you're best in class in every single area, but it gives you at least the focus of, okay, this output tells us that if we don't pull our sleeves up in these particular areas, we're not going to connect to the business or deliver on the business strategy as well as we perhaps.
Yeah.
Right. So it's connecting those dots together, right?
Yeah. It's going back to what I said at the very beginning, which is it's about continuous improvement. It's not about procurement per se. It's about continuous improvement in the business. Right. And it's sort of basically saying, it's a way of thinking. If you go back to the Japanese approach to just-in-time Kaizen and all that, is that, or total quality management, for instance, is thinking about where the business would like me to be, where I get the best bangs for my buck in terms of investment. And then it's a sort of gradual process of steadily improving, I think. And then applying human the approach. It's not just a sort of, right, we're really weak at this, we must fix this. It's, we look really weak in this area. Is that a major issue? Is it doable to sort it out? Or is there some other priority that is more important? But and that's where the human interaction comes in. We're just trying to sort of set the baseline that says you are broadly here. And that's where Assessor and Aurora come in. So as a technology platform, that's what we're trying to do. So with Assessor, we've got about 70. So we've got the levers of change, and then we've got about 70 or 80 observation areas in there that people score themselves against. So I'd say that could be everything from our strategy in procurement reflects the corporate strategy. We have a set of KPIs, all that sort of stuff. Or it could be how good is AP processing, right? Because they're all dimensions of the procurement operation. And then, you know, we've platformed that so that it's nice and efficient for people to complete it and think about how well their business are doing. It's repeatable, etc., and therefore it's cost effective again. And then the output is readily available online. So you can pull that from the system to give yourself a view of where you are today, and drive what improvement action priorities you think are right.
And what about Aurora then?
Yeah, so Aurora assesses people. So what we've done is across about 30 dimensions, and really looking at, you know, competencies, capabilities, etc., standard sort of HR analysis of people. We've contextualized that in terms of the types of skills that procurement people should have. Right. And so one of those could be negotiation. You know, we use a scale of 1 to 4 here, so there's no middle ground. So negotiation would be a very clear-cut procurement competency. So we would assess that in terms of 4 capability levels, and then we ally that to the level of people. So you know, we have generic job levels, because clearly you don't expect a new buyer to be world-class, brilliant at negotiation, but you might expect your procurement director to be, and a leading light in that area.
So as an individual, again, I mean, it's all subjective, right? You might think you're better at something that you're not. And that's everyone. That's human nature, right? So you might think you're bad in some things and you're much better. How do you then help an organization take that information, right? I mean, that is a more exec level. The output of Aurora is going to be an exec level conversation that says, you know, for example, your category managers, these 4 pretty good in these areas. These are the areas that we think you need change. These 2 are actually really bad, and compared to, and obviously you choose your words probably a bit more carefully. But so how does that work? Because I think that's really important, and I can see a lot of customers that would have really benefited from this in the past, if I'm honest. Yeah.
So I just add a point, just in terms of the assessment. The individual assesses themselves, and their boss or their manager assesses them. So we get a sort of same sort of spidergram with 2 lines on it to see how both parties see it. So we get some level of objectivity, but you're right, it's objective. So what does that turn into? It turns into something similar to what we've seen around Assessor, which is a sort of roadmap of what I'm going to do. So you utilize it as part of people's personal development plan, and as part of the overarching plan for procurement. So there's two levels to it. One, at the individual, I've got somebody, they're not very strong in negotiation, you know, for whatever reason. I need to develop them, and I need to focus my training effort and my investment effort, because a lot of it comes from being in negotiations with a colleague and so forth and learning on the ground. I'm going to invest in them over here, and I'm going to make that a very clear-cut development action within their, you know, their personal development plan, PDR review,
or mentorship,
etc.
Yeah,
exactly. You know, all the devices that we're aware of. And then at the other level, it comes into discussion with HR about what do we do when we're recruiting people?
Sure.
What are the new type of people? What does the ideal profile look like? Where are we weak? Where we need some new talent to come in? Because, and I don't mean to displace people, but to develop the existing team. Having somebody new come in who's like a whizzo at negotiation, for example, got a real strong pedigree, that will leach across into the existing team. So it's about a development plan for the individual, but also a development plan within the overarching procurement function, and then probably push up into HR to say this is the sort of way that we need to think about our commercial people.
There's talent management connected to business outcomes, right? But using HR
Absolutely.
as a strategic, connection into that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mo, it's a lot of the time, I think with the Assessor and Aurora case in point, is that a lot of time there's a sort of generic view of what we need to do around here to be better. You know, that could be better have better people, stronger people, or it could be around the way that we operate. But you just need sometimes to take a step back and look at the maturity of your operation, calibrated against some view of what world-class and best-in-class looks like, to then make a decision. And sometimes the decision is the same because you know inherently what you need to do, but it's not always.
Yeah.
And it's part of that ongoing sort of continuous improvement, ongoing learning process, I think. So, you know, that's sort of where it fits in. And what we try to do is to automate this, to make it really simple, and to put down on paper, electronically, if you like, exactly what good and great looks like.
Great. And that's, you know, the reason I thought that this would be interesting is because at a technology level, from an SAP standpoint, we do a great job of that. But this is an area where I think our customers can gain real value, because it isn't only about technology, to your earlier point. It's a number of different things. And if you get this bit right, then the technology solution, which is, you know, it's either a Fiat 500 or a Ferrari, depending on which way you look at it, that's going to be your vehicle to take you along that journey, right? So for me, this is super important, and it's exactly why I wanted people to know about it. So thank you very much for giving us that overview. And please do reach out to Ed and Nick if you want to know more about it, because it really is interesting, and it just simplifies a very complex matter, subject. Now, you picked up, Nick picked up on something earlier when we were talking about suppliers around tail spend. So our next video is going to be about your approach on tail spend, right? So I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you very much for your time today. And guys, watch out, guys and girls, watch out for the next video from Odesma on tail spend, because again, like this, they have a really interesting approach. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Thanks again, Ed and Nick, for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mo.
Thank you. See you.